For a long time, many believers have been comforted by the idea that before things become truly difficult, before pressure reaches its peak, before deception intensifies beyond control, God will simply remove his people from the earth. The narrative is familiar: a sudden disappearance, a quiet escape, a divine evacuation before darkness fully settles in. And because this idea has been repeated so often, it has slowly hardened into assumption, not examined, not tested carefully against the words of Jesus, just accepted. But when Jesus spoke about the end, he did not speak the language of escape. He spoke the language of endurance, warning, testing, and separation. And if we are honest, many of his words do not fit neatly into the comforting framework we have inherited. When the disciples asked Jesus privately about the sign of his coming and the end of the age, they were not casual questions. They were urgent. They were personal. They wanted to know what to expect. And Jesus' response is revealing, not just for what he said, but for the order in which he said it. He did not begin with cosmic signs. He did not begin with political upheaval. He did not begin with rescue. He began with a warning that should still echo loudly today. Take heed that no one deceives you. That warning alone tells us something critical. The greatest danger at the end is not chaos, but confusion, not persecution, but deception, not suffering, but being misled while believing we are safe. Deception does not announce itself as deception. It presents itself as truth with just enough distortion to lead people off course. It flatters, it reassures, it reduces urgency. It tells people they are prepared when they are not. And Jesus made it clear that deception would not be limited to the world. It would enter religious spaces. It would wear spiritual language. It would come through voices claiming authority, insight, and even divine revelation. Many would come in his name. Many would claim to represent him. Many would say, "Here is the Christ," or "There he is," and he warned his followers not to believe them. As Jesus continued speaking, he described wars, famines, earthquakes, and upheaval, but he did not present these as the end. He called them the beginning of sorrows, birth pains, pressure increasing, not decreasing. And then he said something that directly confronts modern comfort theology. You will be delivered up to tribulation. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and many will be offended, betray one another, and hate one another. That sentence alone dismantles the idea that believers will be universally removed before pressure arrives. Jesus was not vague. He was direct. He did not say some hypothetical group far in the future. He said you. What happens next in his teaching is even more sobering. He says that because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Not the faith of atheists, not the morality of unbelievers, the love of many who once followed. Cold love does not happen overnight. It happens slowly, through compromise, fatigue, disappointment, offense, and prolonged pressure. It happens when belief remains, but devotion fades. When confession remains, but obedience weakens. When people still identify as followers of Jesus, but their inner fire has dimmed. This is where separation begins, not at the rapture, but before it. Separation begins in the heart, long before it becomes visible in destiny. Jesus repeatedly illustrated this reality through parables. He spoke of wheat and tares growing together in the same field, both planted in the same space, both nourished by the same conditions, from a distance indistinguishable. This is a picture of the visible kingdom on earth, not pure, not clearly divided, but mixed. And when the servants ask if they should uproot the tares early, Jesus says no. Let both grow together until the harvest. Why? Because premature separation would damage the wheat. But the implication is clear. Separation is coming, and it comes at the harvest, which Jesus defines as the end of the age. What many fail to notice is that before the wheat is gathered, the tares are identified. Before removal comes exposure. The harvest does not begin with reward. It begins with discernment. Angels are sent to identify what truly belongs to the kingdom and what merely occupied its space. This means that proximity to the kingdom does not guarantee participation in its reward. Growing in the same field does not mean sharing the same root. Jesus reinforced this again and again. He spoke of servants who all appear to belong to the same household, yet some are faithful and others abusive. He spoke of a king who invites guests to a wedding feast, yet one is found without proper garments. He spoke of a net cast into the sea, gathering all kinds of fish, only to be sorted at the end. Every one of these images communicates the same truth: mixture now, separation later. Perhaps the most unsettling of all Jesus' warnings comes when he speaks of people who will stand before him confident, vocal, and certain of their standing. They will say, "Lord, Lord," and point to their works, their ministries, their spiritual activity. They will reference prophecy, deliverance, miracles, and yet they will hear words that should shake every believer to the core. "I never knew you. Depart from me." The issue was not that they did nothing. The issue was that activity replaced intimacy and power replaced obedience. They knew about him, but they were not known by him. This is not separation between the church and the world. This is separation within the church. Jesus made this even more personal in the parable of the 10 virgins. All 10 were waiting. All 10 believed the bridegroom was coming. All 10 had lamps. All 10 fell asleep. Nothing in the external appearance distinguished them until delay turned into urgency. When the cry went out announcing the bridegroom's arrival, what had been hidden was suddenly revealed. 5 had oil. 5 did not. The separation did not happen after the door was shut. It happened before. The door closing was simply the final confirmation of a condition that already existed. Oil cannot be borrowed in moments of crisis. Oil represents what is cultivated over time in secret places. Prayer when no one sees. Obedience when it costs something. Repentance when pride resists. Faithfulness when emotions fade. The foolish virgins were not rebellious. They were unprepared. They assumed that being present was enough. They assumed that waiting was the same as being ready, and that assumption cost them everything. Jesus did not tell this parable to frighten unbelievers. He told it to awaken believers. He ended it with a command, not a timeline: watch, be alert. Not because you know the day or hour, but because you do not. Readiness is not about information, it is about condition. When Jesus compared the days of his coming to the days of Noah, he again dismantled shallow assumptions. In Noah's time, people were not necessarily committing extraordinary evil. They were living ordinary lives without regard for God's warnings. Judgment came not because of sudden wickedness, but because of prolonged indifference. And when the flood arrived, the ones taken away were not the righteous. They were the wicked. The righteous remained protected in the ark. This matters when Jesus says that 2 will be in the field, 1 taken and 1 left. Without context, we read comfort where Jesus intended caution. Another repeated theme in Jesus' teaching is endurance. He never presented faith as a moment detached from perseverance. He tied salvation itself to endurance. He who endures to the end will be saved. Endurance implies remaining under pressure. It implies passing through difficulty, not being removed before it arrives. There is no endurance without trial, and no trial without presence. Throughout Scripture, God's people are not defined by escape, but by preservation. Israel was not removed from Egypt before plagues fell. They were shielded within Goshen. Daniel was not extracted from Babylon. He was sustained in the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not spared the furnace. They were preserved within it. The early church was not exempt from persecution. It was purified by it. God refines his people in fire. He reveals their faith under pressure. Tribulation does not destroy true faith. It exposes false faith and strengthens genuine devotion. Comfort can hide motives. Pressure reveals them. Jesus warned that in the last days many would fall away, not because they never believed, but because belief without depth cannot survive sustained pressure. He warned that false prophets would rise and deceive many. He warned that love would grow cold. He warned that not everyone who begins the journey will finish it. And yet, modern theology often emphasizes security without endurance, assurance without examination, and belief without obedience. What emerges from Jesus' teaching is a picture far more serious than most are prepared for. Before any gathering of the elect, there is a shaking. Before reward, there is testing. Before glory, there is refinement. The separation Jesus predicted is not random. It is not unfair. It is the natural result of truth colliding with reality. It distinguishes between those who followed him for comfort and those who followed him for truth, between those who loved blessing and those who loved holiness, between those who built on sand and those who built on the rock. So what happens before the rapture? Deception increases, pressure intensifies, false security spreads, faith is tested, endurance becomes the dividing line. The visible church is shaken, and what can be shaken is shaken, not to destroy what is real, but to remove what is false. The rapture is not the moment when separation begins. It is the moment when separation is finalized. The most dangerous position a believer can occupy is not ignorance of prophecy, but confidence without preparation. Jesus never warned the world to get ready. He warned his followers. He warned those who called him Lord. He warned those who assumed they would enter. He warned those who believed proximity was enough. The question, then, is not whether there will be a rapture. The question is whether we are allowing Jesus' words, not tradition, not comfort, not fear, to define our expectations. Because according to Jesus, before the door closes, oil is revealed. Before the harvest, wheat and tares are distinguished. Before the gathering, endurance is proven. And before glory, there is separation. Those who have ears to hear must listen carefully, not to what we hope will happen, but to what Jesus actually said would happen. And this is where the weight of Jesus' warning becomes impossible to ignore, because the separation he spoke of does not begin in the sky. It begins quietly, internally, long before any trumpet sounds. It begins when pressure exposes priorities, when fear tests loyalty, and when obedience starts to cost more than comfort. Many imagine separation as a dramatic event that happens to people, but in reality, it unfolds as a series of choices people make while believing nothing has changed. Before the end, Jesus said many would be offended. Offense is not loud rebellion. It is silent withdrawal. It is the slow decision to protect oneself rather than remain faithful. It is choosing peace over truth, safety over obedience, and acceptance over holiness. Offense grows when expectations collide with reality, when God does not act according to human timelines, and when following Christ begins to demand endurance rather than excitement. This is how love grows cold, not through sudden hatred, but through gradual distance. Fear plays a powerful role in this separation. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of suffering, fear of standing alone. Under pressure, fear reveals what faith was built on. Some trust God only when obedience is convenient. Others trust him even when obedience brings loss. Jesus warned that in the last days betrayal would rise, not because people suddenly become evil, but because fear convinces them that survival matters more than faithfulness. When pressure mounts, allegiance is tested, and neutrality becomes impossible. This is why Jesus never emphasized escape as preparation. He emphasized readiness. Readiness is not knowing prophetic timelines. It is having a heart anchored deeply enough that it does not drift when storms arrive. It is having a faith rooted deeply enough that it does not collapse when support systems fail. It is having a love for truth strong enough that it is not traded for comfort when deception offers relief. Many will not walk away from Christ angrily. They will drift away quietly. They will redefine obedience. They will soften conviction. They will spiritualize compromise. They will tell themselves that God understands, that the times are difficult, that survival requires flexibility, and slowly, without realizing it, they will exchange endurance for accommodation. This is the falling away Jesus warned about. Not dramatic apostasy, but subtle realignment. Separation accelerates when pressure lasts longer than expected. Delay exposes depth. This is why the bridegroom tarried in Jesus' parable. Delay reveals whether faith was built for moments or for seasons. Those who rely on emotions struggle when enthusiasm fades. Those who rely on intimacy endure when feelings disappear. The foolish virgins were not rejected because they waited. They were rejected because they waited without oil. They waited without cultivating what was necessary to endure delay. Jesus never promised that following him would be easy at the end. He promised that it would be worth it. He did not promise protection from hardship. He promised preservation through it. He did not promise removal from pressure. He promised strength to endure. He did not promise clarity without confusion. He promised truth for those who love it more than comfort. The separation Jesus predicted is therefore not arbitrary. It is the natural outcome of truth encountering reality. When light increases, shadows retreat. When pressure intensifies, false foundations collapse. When obedience costs something, motives are revealed. Those who love Christ more than life endure. Those who love life more than Christ slowly let go. This is why Jesus said that narrow is the path, and difficult is the way that leads to life, and few find it. The path does not become narrow at the end. It has always been narrow. What changes at the end is visibility. Pressure removes the illusion of breadth. It becomes clear who is walking the path, and who was merely standing near it. Before any gathering, there is refinement. Before any reward, there is testing. Before any trumpet, there is truth. The rapture does not create readiness, it reveals it. It does not separate believers from unbelievers as much as it confirms who truly belong to Christ when belonging required endurance. This is why self-examination matters now, not later. Not to produce fear, but to produce clarity. Not to question salvation endlessly, but to ensure faith is alive, rooted and resilient. Jesus' warnings were not meant to paralyze his followers. They were meant to awaken them. He spoke these things so that when they began to happen, his disciples would not be shaken, offended, or deceived. The question every listener must eventually face is not whether they believe in the rapture, but whether their faith can withstand what comes before it. Can it endure loss without bitterness? Can it remain obedient without applause? Can it remain faithful without comfort? Can it hold to truth when deception is persuasive and compromise is rewarded? Because before glory, there is separation. Before celebration, there is endurance. Before the gathering, there is refining. And before the door closes, oil is revealed. Jesus has already told us what happens before the end. The only question that remains is whether we are listening closely enough to prepare, not with speculation, but with surrender.